Well then, we'll just jump in and we'll have time for some questions. So you do have some handouts. I hope you have some handouts. The list of journals that I'm going to pull up on the screen here in a minute. And I sent Lisa an article that I'm going to use as an example, and that we're going to kind of walk through here in just a minute. But I want to start by going back, God, almost 30 years now, when I was a new assistant professor at a large public research university where publishing, the adage publish or perish was very true. And I had a very good friend and colleague and mentor who came into my office one day. This was back in the day when you could still smoke in buildings on campus. And the guy's name was Cliff Drew, and he comes into my office with a cigarette, and he goes, "So, what are you up to?" And I started telling him everything that I was doing. And he sits back and takes this huge drag off of his cigarette, and he goes, "You're doing it wrong." And I said, what do you mean? And to this day, I live this mantra and share it. He goes, "Write what you teach and teach what you write." And he goes, "And you should be writing about what you're doing." So he goes, "What are you doing right now?" And we were going through a whole new state certification criteria for teacher education, and I was up to my eyeballs in the State Office of Education working on this. And he said, "So are you writing about this?" And I said, "No." He goes, "Why not?" And make a long story short, my first publication in a peer-reviewed journal was about that process. I took that to heart, and I would write about anything I was teaching and anything I was doing. So even as I started doing service learning and community engagement, I would encounter something like students' challenges with reflection. And my challenge with reflection, I didn't know how to conduct reflection. So with a little research, I created a rubric called the ABCs of Reflection. And to this day, it's one of the most cited articles in the literature because I wrote about my experience and what I created, and I made a contribution to the field and to the literature based on what I was doing at the time. Another example is I started getting better at reflection, and my students were going into dark places that I did not anticipate. And so I wrote an essay called "The Shadow Side of Reflection in Service Learning." I share that with you to show you that you don't need to separate research and scholarship and teaching, or service for that matter. And to be an engaged scholar, you integrate these things. Now I realize that research is not probably the same priority at St. Francis University as it was where I was, but I do know, because I've seen your promotion and tenure guidelines, that there is an expectation to do some research and get some publications and to do some presentations. So I'm going to give you an example of how to take your course and turn it into an article or a presentation. So I want to begin by posing a question to you. Do you need to go through IRB to do what, I'm going to phrase this very carefully, listen carefully. Do you need to go through Institutional Review Board to teach a community engagement or service learning class?
No.
That's right. You don't need IRB simply to teach the class or do any kinds of evaluation. When do you need to go through IRB?
Human subjects are involved?
When do you need to go through IRB when you're doing this work?
Okay.
That's right. When you're going to disseminate, either through a publication or a presentation, that's when you have to go through IRB. And it got so that I just proactively, a priori, started going through IRB whenever I taught these courses, because something always came up, and you cannot get retroactive IRB approval when you're doing this. So I just got in the habit of going through IRB before I taught these courses, anticipating that I was going to write or present about it. So I encourage you to at least think about that and consider it. And after a while, your institution's IRB committee will get familiar, and Lisa's office can help grease the skids to make this. When I was at St. Mary's College, we had a whole system and protocol that if you went through the faculty development cohort learning community, my office that I was directing, we created a template and an expedited IRB review process because it became institutionalized at St. Mary's. So with that, I'm going to talk about a course I taught at St. Mary's. And I don't know if some of you in the room were there when I did a workshop. Lisa, were any of these folks at my workshop when I did opera?
Kara, Bree, Chris, yeah, about 4 or 5 of them.
Okay. What you're going to see in this manuscript, I'm going to put up on the screen, and you may have there with you. It doesn't matter. I'm going to put it up on the screen here. Is you're going to see opera serving as essentially the outline for this article. So I'm bringing up, oops, I'm going to share my screen here. Once I find it.
Yeah, and guys, that opera manual that he's talking about is on the community engagement module you should have on your dashboard. So it is in there.
Okay, can you see this article?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. This article is in a peer-reviewed journal, so it counts, so to speak. And it is about a class I taught in a January term at St. Mary's College. So it was 4 weeks long, 4 hours a day, 4 days a week. And I taught a course on the musical group U2. And it was a service learning class. And it got published. And it gets a lot of hits. This particular journal is an online journal, and so I can quickly go in and check and see how many downloads it's had. And it's had a bunch from all over the world. Tel Aviv, Israel, Turkey, you name it. So, I have the title and your basic introduction, okay? Your standard format to an article. And what I then did was gave some background and some terms of activism and advocacy as an engaged pedagogy, saying that these were actually ways of teaching and learning. And I gave some definitions here. So I talked about spirituality, service learning, engaged spirituality. So I have a lexicon here, operational definition. And then I have a background on the music and spiritual activism of U2, giving a background of the band. And then I get into the course description. So now you're going to start to see opera emerge here. So, I started with the theoretical and theological foundation. One of the things that we talk about in our book that I hope you have, that Lisa will share with you, in fact, I think it's chapter 2 in the book, is many faculty are grounded theoretically in their studies, but they don't necessarily know about the theory of teaching and learning. And so it's really important that when we're writing about our courses, we give a theoretical foundation for what it is we did and how we did it. And so I presented here in this article, this happened to be a journal called Engaged Pedagogy in Catholic Higher Education. So I gave a theoretical background, and you can see here I have Catholic social thought as a key principle. And then I went into engaged pedagogy and engaged teaching and learning. So I've shifted from theological to more of a pedagogical description of the course, of active learning, learning as a social process, knowledge shaped by conflicts, reflective practice, capacity to represent an idea in more than one modality. And then some more, focusing on skills such as political knowledge, communication, civic judgment, collective action, community organizing. So all these are the concepts that I taught, as well as Walter Brueggemann's theoretical constructs of the Psalms. So I have a very strong theoretical foundation. And then I articulate the objectives, which just happens to be the first letter in the opera rubric, objectives. And what I do is I use these 6 or 7 objectives as my anchors for assessing the impact and outcome of my course. I created measures to see if all 7 of these objectives were accomplished in my class. Then I articulate the outline of the course, describing the Jan term as a month-long study of one topic. And then I outlined the course activities. I had a community partner, and I had a service learning project with the partner. What was unique about this particular course is my partner was at a distance. It was one.org in Washington, D.C. And so we would Skype with our liaison who guided us through 4 weeks of our projects. Okay. And then so there's detailed description of the 4 projects that my students could choose from. Then I list my other assignments. There was a student presentation, there was a written paper, there was a reflection activity, there was a final exam, and then I give an outline of each of the 4 weeks. There's week 1, that was kind of long, week 2, week 3, and week 4. Now I articulate the outcomes. So there were 4 projects, service learning projects, that my students could choose from. They had to pick one and come up with an action plan that reflected the basic skills of community organizing, and they had to submit an action plan that I graded. So this text here is just a description of all 4 of those projects and their outcomes. And I will summarize here by telling you that all 4 teams and all 4 projects met their goals. The other thing I did, and frankly I do it in all my classes, I always do a pre-post measure. I've always done it. And I like to see where my students are starting from and where they end up. So I did a simple t-test, and I had 25 key concepts and terms that I was going to talk about in the class. And I gave it to them on the first day of class, and it was their final exam. So here, you can see the pre-test mean score was 1.226, and the post-test, and there are 25 points possible, and the post-test mean score was 20, with a p-value of 0.02. So I had very statistically significant results, which then I could say, come back to my cognitive objectives. It appears that my students did actually learn something. Then I turned to a qualitative analysis and assessment by reading their papers, their reflection papers. And here, and I have permission from the students. So right here is a passage from their from a reflection journal. Here's another one. In fact, there's about 4 or 5 of them. And then I have a conclusion. right here that wraps up, essentially goes back and articulates how each of those 7 objectives were met. All right? And that's what, 15-page article. Let me stop sharing the screen here and come back to that. So, I mean, that's kind of a whiz-bang model here. It doesn't appear that you have those handouts. Do you have the handouts there?
I do not, Marshall. I emailed it to everybody. We're kind of...
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. So could you see that on the screen, okay?
Yes. Some people on their laptops and pulled it up too.
Okay. So does that give you a sense of how you could describe a class? And keep in mind that just writing about a class isn't going to get published. I think some of the reasons this particular manuscript was accepted was, one, it was somewhat novel in the topic area. Secondly, it was a Jan term class, so it was condensed into 4 weeks. 3, my community partner was at a distance, which that was very unique and novel, and they were very pleased with the outcomes of our work. And 4, I was able to document quantitatively and qualitatively outcomes and impact of the course on a pre and post measure, qualitative content analysis of reflections, and products. My students had come up with an action plan, which is basically a blueprint using community organizing to do something. So there were some events on campus. They started a chapter of 1.org. And so there was a demonstrable deliverable to indicate the students actually did assimilate the skills of community organizing and did sort of a mini abbreviated kind of community organizing. To me, what was really gratifying was to read the reflection journals. We had reflection every week and then kind of a summative thing. And the students really revealed some deep emotions and interesting feelings that, a quantitative measure on a pre-post just aren't going to capture or convey. And so I believe that the editors and the reviewers of the article saw this as a unique work and a contribution to the field and literature of something new. And I state in the introduction, I'm providing enough detail for faculty and colleagues to replicate, not the course itself, but replicate the process and kind of the techniques and methods I used, which is also important in our research, is we want it to be replicated. So I'll stop right there and just see if there are any comments or questions about the course, about the writing process, the article, and just see if there are any questions just offhand before we go on.
If anybody has any questions, if you could either yell or come up to the mic. Yeah. Was that the first journal that you selected to submit this to?
Yeah.
Okay.
But it was like custom made for a journal like that. I mean, engaged pedagogy in Catholic higher education. I mean, come on.
Right. Yeah.
So that goes back to the old adage, know your audience really well. And so I'll wait for more questions. Then I'm going to bring up that list of journals here in a second. Any other comments or questions? I think the process was also good for me as a reflective practitioner to write about the experience when it was all over. It was good for me to reflect and process. This was the second time I had taught the course. And the first time I taught it, it wasn't service learning, it wasn't engaged community engagement or engaged pedagogy. It was sort of a traditional didactic course. And so I learned a lot, and it was good for me as a reflective practitioner, which we talk about in one of the chapters in the book. So,
I have a question.
Lori has a question.
Marshall, this is Laurie Chose. I'm wondering, I'm really fascinated with the idea of a partner who you met through Skype and did distance work. What exactly did your students do? What was their contribution to the partner in that type of setting?
good question. Well in advance of the January course, in the fall, I contacted one.org, which is an advocacy group that you two started. And I don't know if they're a U2 aficionado, but one is a song. It is a song by U2.
Yeah.
And they started this organization, and it's in Washington, D.C., and it's called one.org. So I called them, and they actually had a college campus liaison. And they said, oh, we have all kinds of initiatives and projects all around the country, all around the world. And one of the things we want to do is establish a chapter on college campuses. Would you be interested in having your students do that? And I said, sure, we can do that. And then I said, well, what are your initiatives? And this was really cool for this. They said, we actually have points that we can award schools in the number of hours and students who are involved, and we recognize them publicly, and Bono sends them a letter and all this. So there are these little dangly carrots in front of them. But for participating, but let's see if I remember what the other three initiatives they asked for help. There was a bill coming up in Congress that they wanted help with. So it was a letter writing campaign, an electronic letter writing campaign to your congressional representative to vote in favor of a bill. That was one. Second one was, I can go to my article here. The second one was an awareness. Another one with Congress. There was Congress was going to cut foreign aid, and so there was an awareness program to ask people if they knew how much of the federal budget was allocated to foreign aid. And so my students made a video, and they went around campus and asked students and faculty, do you know what percentage of the federal budget is allocated to foreign aid? By the way, do any of you know?
I don't.
Anybody want to guess?
1%? It's low. 1, 2%, something like that.
How much?
1 or 2%?
Yeah, it was 2% at the time, and they wanted to cut it by 1%. And of course, most people responded, 15, 20%. They didn't have any idea. And when they heard that it was going to be cut, and it was already minuscule, then the students asked, how do you feel about that? And they, most of the people said, well, not very good. And then they handed them a petition, and it was a petition drive to go to Congress to not cut federal budget for foreign aid. And then there was another awareness thing for, it was to provide electricity, solar-powered electricity in Africa, because a lot of college students were literally doing their homework in parking lots of places that would have lights because they didn't have electricity at home. And some of the local clinics didn't have electricity to keep vaccines in refrigerators. And so it was something like Electrify Africa. And so it was a campaign for awareness and to raise money to provide electricity in certain parts of Africa. So they were awareness campaigns petition, letter writing, and establish a chapter of one.org on campus. And they were learning community activism, how to be good community activists. And they got interviewed on the campus radio station. They had an event in one of the buildings on campus where they turned off the lights and asked students to try to do their homework in there without electricity. And it was just this consciousness raising thing. So the students did in fact learn how to be good community organizers and create events and awareness. They had a targeted goal of a certain number of signatures they wanted, and these were all suggested by the partner in Washington, D.C. So halfway through the course, the 4 weeks, 2 weeks into it, we Skyped with the young woman who had been talking to us. I have some pictures of my students standing and talking to the screen like you're doing now, and we were Skyping with her. And then at the end of the quarter, or at the end of the Jan term, we had a closure, and she was thrilled with, their work, and the video that they did on the interview about foreign aid was posted on the national one.org website. It was being showcased and touted. So I went in with initially a lot of trepidation about at a distance, but I've forgotten the woman's name. I'm going to say Lindsay was her name. But she was really clear. No, I want this, 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 and this. And she gave me material. She said, this is on our website. You can go get this. And we were able to meet their goals and needs and desires. And we checked in with them halfway through and then had the follow-up closing survey. So it was a bold experiment that actually worked. So I think a partner at a distance can work if you have the kind of infrastructure and if they have their act together. Okay, can you see this list on your screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna scroll down at the bottom. I took this from ESC, which is the Engaged Scholarship Consortium. Online, and it's also listed in our book. What I like about this is the array of disciplines that's in here. So, I think it's got just about everything here. Here's anthropology, community development, education, let's see. Here's econ, STEM, but a lot of these are devoted to engaged pedagogy. They're not just disciplinary focus, but a lot of disciplines are starting to devote sections of journals and conferences. Like here's science education and civic engagement. So these are legitimate, peer-reviewed, refereed journals that should count when it comes to promotion and tenure. Also, in this book, chapter 12 gives, and it's all about preparing for promotion tenure review, and it walks you through how to prepare your portfolio and how to articulate what this work is to your colleagues, because they don't know what this is. And they're going to sit there and go, what's picking up trash along the highway got to do with scholarship? And the answer is, well, it doesn't. Unless maybe you're in civic engineering or something. So, so it really is a tool for you to prepare. And I don't know if you've seen it at all, but here, I'll just turn to the page here and pull it up. Throughout the book and the workbook are little QR squares. And so you can swipe your phone or tablet over it and hear people, you can have an engaging conversation with an engaged scholar who will talk to you about promotion and tenure, community partnerships. You'll hear community partners talk about their experience. So we've interspersed all of those in the book and in the workbook as well.
Yeah, and just to add to that, again, I'll be sending an email out to everybody, but I'd like to have a monthly learning community, and if anybody that would like to do that, get the book, and then we downloaded the toolkit. It's 143 pages of hands-on exercises that go with the book. People can do it on their own if they want to. I'd be happy to get the book for you if you want to do it on your own, but if you want to come to as much as you can to talk about it as a group, we'll figure something out there.
So, for example, I just randomly opened up a page here, and it's a chapter on cultural competence, and what you and how that's important in this work. And up at the top is a little box that says Toolkit 5.6. Refer to exercise 5.6 in your workbook. Reflect on how you might put the diversity principles into practice in your course. And so it's truly a workbook to help you integrate the concepts and principles that are presented in the book into your actual planning. So if there aren't any questions about that example of the U2 article, I thought I would propose a couple of ideas for you to consider. But I don't want to move on unless there are any other questions or comments so far.
You guys good?
Good.
Okay. We're good.
Go ahead.
Yep, thanks, Marshall.
Okay. I alluded to this earlier in my comments that I just always do pre and post measures. And whether I'm doing service learning classes or not, and whether or not I plan on publishing or presenting about my classes. I use it as a teaching tool with my students and show them, saying, here's what you know and here's what you don't know, and here's what you need to know. And so it becomes sort of a criterion referenced assessment. We can see where they started and how far they've come. So, one thing I would strongly encourage you to consider that will help you create a potentially publishable article is to do that kind of measurement, because it's empirical, it's quasi-experimental. And to make it even sweeter, if you have a second section or another course on the same topic that is not an engaged course or service learning, it can serve as a comparison or a control group. And so we've done that as well. If you take your basic sociology course on surveys or stats, and there's two sections of them. One's service learning, the other one isn't. The activities are essentially the same, and you make a comparison to see if there's a significant difference in some kind of dependent variable. Another thing that, so that's more quantitative. I have two more suggestions for you. The second is qualitative. Some of you in the room are qualitative researchers. And to do a content analysis of students' reflection entries in their journals or in their papers. And there's actually some rubrics and techniques to use to, well, for lack of other, chart their movement emotionally and cognitively. And that's actually in the book as well. But even without that particular rubric, a qualitative content analysis is a very interesting way to report the impact, and I want to talk about that in a second, of your course, and make a contribution to the field. In fact, I'll talk about that now. There's a difference between outcomes and impact. And traditionally in higher education, we look at outcomes, and an outcome could be an article, conference presentation, a grant, something that you've achieved. But that doesn't, but a book on a shelf is not necessarily impactful. Okay, it's an outcome, it's something that happened, and it's a product, but we don't know the impact of it. And part of engaged teaching and learning is not outcome-based, it's impact-based. And what we want to do is assess to what degree there was an impact on the community and an impact on the students, and as we argue in our book, an impact on you as a professional and an impact on the institution and your discipline. So many students are quite adept at test taking. And so merely looking at grades from a final exam is an outcome, but it's not necessarily indicative of the impact you've had on their course, the impact your course has had on them. It could mean that they're just really good test takers. But if they had to come up with a marketing plan for a nonprofit organization, or come up with a plan to reroute rainwater in a botanical garden at a community park, you're seeing actual implementation and application of what they've learned in your class. And if a community partner can attest to it and say, yes, we adopted this product, this new technique, you're showing that it's had an impact on the community. And in the social behavioral sciences, and we talk about this in the book, that's called social validation. Because we can get statistically significant results in a controlled environment in a laboratory, but as the educators in the room know, sometimes the statistically significant change in a third grader's reading score isn't clinically significant. Okay? All right, so a third grader went from a 3.1 grade level to 3.5, and that's statistically significant. Who cares? Okay, but because it's not clinically or meaningfully impactful. And so when we teach courses that are engaged, we're looking at how it impacts students' learning and the impact on the community partner and how they serve their clients. And that is academically and scholarly important as well, because it transcends just a theoretical premise and it tests that premise in theory. So that's why I wanted to emphasize impact. The last thing that I want to suggest that your institution consider, and you as a cadre of engaged scholars, is I believe you now have a designation process of designating courses as CE on your campus, correct?
Correct.
This would be a really interesting little experiment for your cadre and community of engaged scholars, and to boundary cross and form a partnership with your institutional research office on your campus, which I know you have. That is, what impact is community engagement having on student retention? The literature and the research is starting to show a trend that when students are engaged, civically engaged in their course, in their learning, retention to complete all 4 years on campus appears to be impacted by that in some way. Now, of course, there's no causal, but there seems to be a correlation. It would not be hard at all to take, to tag all the courses that the folks in that room teach and run a multiple regression analysis in your IR office and compare it with other courses to see if there's a trend on student retention. This goes back to something I said earlier about impact. Not only is your scholarship having an impact on student learning or the community, you may very well be having an impact on your institution. And you're climbing up out of your isolated academic disciplinary silo to help your college, university, institution continue its Franciscan Catholic mission, its liberal arts mission, and being a good partner with your community as well. So I think that would be a rather grand and bold adventure and experiment. But I have a lot of time on my hands, so I can think of things like that.
I have had that conversation with Kate Dieter, who is our IR person here, and I think that it's something we can do. Now, our retention rate is a very high retention rate. I think it's like 89%. Does that sound about right? Yeah, and so I've heard a lot of talk lately on campus that they want to continue to increase retention even higher than 89, which is like a very, very good retention rate, right? So that was the conversation I had with Kate. She said,
But you know, there's other dependent variables you can use to see. It could be because your school uses other surveys, all the time that you probably aren't aware of. The NESI and other different surveys. And so that's something to have a chat with your IR office. So I've been doing a lot of the talking. Do you have any questions or comments about the publication or presentation or promotion and tenure or just in general? Because I'm aware of our time here.
well, I know in the last week or so, I had 4 faculty members who were up for tenure who reached out to the center to get a letter for their portfolio. So I see that as a positive move in the right direction. That at least.
Let me ask you, how many of people in the room are on the tenure track? Raise your hands. Okay. I can see 2/3 of the room. So Lisa, how many?
So we lost some folks, but there's 3 professors here: Trisha, Kara, and Kelly, all who've been members of the committee. And Jess is the new general education person. So not to get on a tangent, but we've had a conversation with regard to as they revisit how that's going to look in the future, the gen ed. Can we keep this CE stuff on the radar? And Jess is very much on board with
Well, even if you have some adjunct professors sitting in the room, you go through performance review. You may not be going through promotion and tenure review, but you go through performance review to see if your contract's going to be renewed. Every person in that room, have to be a self-advocate of the work that you're doing. Your colleagues and administrators are very dedicated scholars in their field and their discipline, and they are completely agnostic about what community engagement is. And I don't mean that in a derogatory manner. They're ignorant of it. They don't know what it is. And they're going to make assumptions of what it is unless you say, no, it's based on these theoretical principles. It's firmly grounded in these things. And our book gives you, it is a quiver to draw a bunch of arrows out of to state your case. And part of the workbook activities is, given your field, your discipline, which one of these theories or constructs resonates with you or would play best for you. But it's in your best interest to articulate what this is and why you do it, and then document the impact it's had. And if you can, it's icing on the cake if you can say, and I've had a publication and presentation about my work. The other thing how are we doing on diverse faculty at your institution? Is that an issue?
It's a problem. Go ahead, Lori.
Well, I don't want to speak. I just kind of happen to be by the microphone. I would say, I mean, I don't have the statistics, but I would say it's definitely a problem. It's an issue. It's an issue.
Yeah, it's an issue. And there's a lot of other issues that you're aware of with this university right now, Marshall.
From just the view I have, looks pretty white. And pretty female from where I'm sitting for the most part.
Yes?
I
Now,
think we actually
this-
have, I do know the male to female faculty ratio. I asked HR about that not long ago. And we're about 60-40 female to male.
Okay. Here's something else for you to think about, and it's in my other book. Lisa has it. I don't have the table to bring up on the screen, but it's a very robust study from the Higher Education Research Institute at UCLA. I just happen to have
It's my Bible.
But I wanted to see what the N is of the study. They did it 2 times, like I think 2004 and again 2014. Let me find it here. Well, the N was like 14,000. I mean, this was a big N, a big survey. And they're surveying new first-year assistant professors. The point is, the trend from 2004 to 2014, the demographics of the faculty doing this work clearly showed a trend of women of color doing this work. So, this is important to your institution, and I'm sure it's going to be of interest to your administration. The new professoriate is shopping for an institution, a home, just like you're shopping for a new faculty member. And they're going to ask or investigate, is this work supported? Are there resources for it? Is it rewarded in the promotion and tenure process? And is there a cadre of like-minded, kindred spirit colleagues that I can work with and form a community? If not, they will go somewhere else. And that's a fact. And so it is in the best interest in your pursuit of a diverse professoriate to continue to maintain the resources and the support and the commitment to this work, or they're likely to go elsewhere. So, higher education is driven by faculty. And if this matters to you, you need to make sure your administrators understand this and say, we want this to be a priority. We need to maintain the resources, the offices, these books, these workshops. We need to make sure the promotion and tenure process is revisited, because faculty will be heard by the administration. It's got to come from you.
Amen.
And the part about diverse faculty, that's just pragmatic. That's just, okay, that's not even philosophical, or, it's just nuts and bolts stuff.